So we're glad and happy to receive you here, and we are very honored to have Dr. Matthew Hanna. Some of you already met him 3 years ago. He's from Wisconsin University. Formerly, he was from Purdue University the last time you knew him. So we are especially delighted to host him once again at the Faculty of Letters and Human Sciences, following his first visit to our university in early 2022, when he led a series of highly successful workshops that introduced him to our MA and PhD students then, leading particularly interesting workshops, cutting edge, I would say, in the field of digital humanities. That first encounter was both intellectually stimulating and pedagogically impactful, and it contributed significantly to strengthening our engagement with digital scholarship within the linguistic, literary, cultural, and interdisciplinary research lab. I think, Matthew Hanna, or you already know that we integrated digital humanities in our syllabus, our MA syllabus, and so we're struggling with that, but we have some excellent faculty who are doing their best to familiarize and acquaint students with digital humanities. But today's lecture, Digital Futures for Provocations, would enlighten us even more about this field. This lecture would reflect the spirit of sustained international academic collaboration that we seek to foster through our research lab and through our partnership with universities in Morocco and abroad. So I would quickly introduce Dr. Matthew Hanna. For those who have never had a chance to meet him, today I think is the big day for this. So he's the Director of Digital Scholarship Hub and Associate Professor of Communication Arts at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, state of Wisconsin. His professional profile brings together research, teaching, and the development of digital infrastructures that support innovative scholarship across disciplines. Mind you, he's also a specialist in the field of literature and human sciences and humanities. That's his original call, that's his background. Then he converted, so he's able to adjust to all this innovative scholarship in the field of digital humanities, and that's what we want to learn from him today to expand our knowledge of this field. So without much ado, the floor is yours, Matt.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It is very, very good for me to be back in Morocco, and especially back in Tétouan at your wonderful university. I want to begin by thanking Dr. Bijit and Dr. Barhoun for arranging this visit and for arranging my trip to come to Tétouan and speak to you today about the future directions for digital humanities. And I'll begin by giving a little overview of what the digital humanities are, if you're unfamiliar with them. And then I'll suggest 4 possible future directions for scholars who are interested in technology and the humanities and want to think more about these future possibilities. So I've called the talk Digital Futures for Provocations, and the provocations are meant to sort of suggest to you possibilities that you might think about in your own career as a scholar or a teacher or a researcher. And so in a sense, I'm hoping to provoke you a little bit with these 4 different directions for digital scholarship. So who am I? Some of you I remember from 2022, which seems like many, many, many years ago now. I've gotten a little bit grayer since then. But these 2 still look exactly the same. My name is Matthew Hanna. I've been practicing in the field of digital humanities since my doctoral dissertation in English, when I began to notice that people were starting to talk about possibilities for using computers to better understand history, literature, philosophy, art. To think about the ways that technology can combine with the humanities to produce new research opportunities and new projects. And I became very interested in this as I began my studies. Since that time, I have been involved in building digital humanities work at 4 universities in the United States. And I've begun to think about what this history, this trajectory, or this career might suggest for the future of this field. And there's a lot to talk about there. There's many things that have happened and changed since 2015 that are very interesting. Currently, I am the director of something called the Digital Scholarship Hub. This is a central location located in the libraries which will support researchers who want to use computer technology in their research. Whether that's artificial intelligence, whether that's complicated modeling techniques or tools, we're going to provide a space for that kind of research. And I was hired, this is my first semester in this new position at the University of Wisconsin, and I'm very excited about the possibilities. We're going to build an actual physical lab space in the library, and it will be an area for research and teaching and for events such as this. And I'm very excited about the work that you're doing here to build your own language and literature lab as well. And I think there are many possibilities for collaboration on those projects. I'm also a professor in the Department of Communication Arts, particularly in the Digital Studies program. And I research online platforms and conspiracy theories. So we'll talk more about that later, but I focus on rhetoric, politics, and culture, especially as they appear on the internet. So I've seen some very strange things out there, and we'll talk some about that. I'm the director, and I have a team of scholars working underneath of me. So my associate director is named Anna Hensch, and she has a PhD in mathematics, focused on number theory. And she's an expert in artificial intelligence. And together we are the leadership of the Digital Scholarship Hub. She was a researcher from the National Science Foundation on artificial intelligence, and she was a policy advisor for U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren last year. We also have 2 other scholars who work with us, Cameron Cook and Jennifer Patino, and together we are responsible for leading this new initiative to develop digital scholarship. Now, currently, we have an empty floor of the library, so we're really starting from literally nothing. But we're already beginning to think about what would go into something like a digital scholarship lab. Now, you might be saying, what is the digital humanities? And you would not be wrong to ask that question, since many people who work in the digital humanities don't actually know what it is. So I'm going to try to explain it, and hopefully it will make sense. But if not, you can ask me questions later, or even attack me vigorously if you don't understand it. It's part of a longer tradition in academic research focused on using computers to understand culture. Scholars very early on began to realize that computers are very powerful tools, and they can help us to think about art and literature and history in different ways than we can just as human beings. The history of what we might call the digital humanities goes back quite a ways, long before any of you were around, beginning in the 1940s. In the 1940s, after World War II, there was this rise in computers. People began to use computers for things. And a Catholic priest began to contemplate the idea of using computers to record and analyze the writings of Thomas Aquinas. And so he started to develop this digital concordance working with IBM. And this was the first time somebody had thought that computers could be used to understand archival materials, to understand writing, to understand language. In the 1960s, we began to see new conferences appearing, new symposia appearing. So things like the Literary Data Processing Conference in England. We began to see new journals, much like your own new journal that just launched here, which is very exciting. So the journal Computer and the Humanities launched in 1966. And then in the 70s and 80s, we began to see the appearance of new organizations, new large groups of universities working together to put forward new conferences and new research. So for example, the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations launched in the 1980s. And they began to think about things like, how do we make text, manuscripts, readable for computers? Most of you probably don't think about that now, but it takes a very complicated set of tasks to make things like PDFs available. You're very fortunate because now you can just download PDFs all over the place and read them. I'm sure you're doing a lot of your coursework reading PDFs and things that are provided. But it took a lot of time and work to make those things readable for a computer. And so we see these new projects, these new initiatives beginning to appear. Then in the 2000s, somebody came up with the idea of distant reading. And distant reading was the idea that if you had text that could be read in a computer, what if you could use the computer to read the texts? So most of you, is everybody familiar with close reading, where you analyze a text very carefully and you look for things like symbols and metaphors, right? This is what many of you are probably learning to do. You say, oh, this is symbolic of death or love or whatever, right? And then you do your analysis of the text. Some people began to say, what if we could do something with computers that would say, look at thousands of novels? And what if we could tease out patterns across thousands of novels? And they called this distant reading. Now at the time, some people said, we could read all of literature and understand everything. And it turned out that we could not do that. But we can do a lot of really amazing things with computers to tease out or expose the patterns in literature. So for example, it's now very easy to give a computer all of Shakespeare's plays and then ask it to tell me what are the most frequently used words. Give me the top 100 words that appear in all of Shakespeare's plays. Then you could use that list to maybe write a paper to analyze, oh, this is an interesting word that I didn't realize would appear when I had to read hundreds of Shakespeare's plays. I love Shakespeare, but it's very, very difficult to read that much material. So they began to think about computers as a possibility for this. And it was very controversial when it started. Even when I started doing this in 2012, people would get very angry because they felt like the computer was replacing human beings. That might be familiar to you now, thinking about things like artificial intelligence. And that's a very important thing that we keep in mind when we talk about technology. It should never replace human thought, human creativity. Then in 2009, at the Modern Language Association, someone said, digital humanities, the next big thing. And that was the beginning of this field. people really began to talk about the digital humanities. There were conferences on the digital humanities. There were special panels at the major literary conferences that talked about the digital humanities. And I argue that part of the interest in this focus on technology was also partly due to the financial crisis in 2008, because people thought there are no more jobs, the economy is really bad. Maybe if I add the study of literature to the study of computers and technology, I'll be able to find employment. And so many people, I think, were interested in adding new skills to their scholarly study in the humanities. In 2010s, we begin to see new books and publications on this field, such as Debates in the Digital Humanities. This is a wonderful set of books, if you're curious about this field, that are freely available online, and you can read some of those original materials, and they are free and available. We also began to see how the field started to come together as a field, not just a small group of weirdos, weird scholars doing strange things with computers. It began to appear to coalesce into a field of its own. And then in the 2020s, we see the rise of things like large language models. Have people heard about large language models, artificial intelligence, and tools that can work with text at scale, at a large scale? And we'll talk about some of those things in a moment. So this is a kind of overview of the digital humanities as a field. Of course, I'm leaving out a lot of things, but this should give you a good idea of this history. I started doing digital humanities, like I said, in about 2012 in my dissertation. And it was a very interesting experience trying to learn how to do close reading and distant reading at the same time. Now, this early phase of digital humanities, I argue, is starting to be replaced now by other possible futures that we'll talk about. We might think about this as digital humanities 1.0, if we want to be tech bro about it. So this is focused on large scale, mostly canonical being, the sort of the big figures of literary history, cultural projects, or digital archives. So for example, the Walt Whitman Archive is one of the early digital humanities projects, collecting all of Walt Whitman's letters and making them available online. That way you don't have to travel all the way to the United States, then go to 10 different libraries that hold the actual letters. And you've talked a little bit about your own research and how it uses these digital archives. The emphasis here was on building community and building different tools that we could use. And when I came last time in 2022, we talked a lot about those tools. What kinds of tools did people build? And we used some of them. Some of the other ones we broke. There were also a lot of debates and arguments among humanists about the impact of the digital humanities. Many thought that this was sort of a neoliberal capitalist takeover of the university, and you would actually see articles in the New York Times attacking the digital humanities, which seems kind of insane now, but it is true, and they're still available online. And then we saw the rise of an interest in quantitative analysis for literature. Counting words, doing statistics with language. A lot of emphasis on big data and thinking about how we can use big data to understand literary history. And this led to new interesting sub-areas of research, such as the area called cultural analytics. And cultural analytics is a fancy way of saying doing statistics with books. So this, I would say, is digital humanities 1.0. It's still very popular. There's a lot of great work happening in this area, and you can read about a lot of this online for free. For example, the Journal of Cultural Analytics is available open source, open access, and you can read the articles for free. I would say now we're entering potentially a new phase of digital humanities, which I call digital humanities 2.0. And that's kind of silly. I'm being sort of silly about that. That's not really what it's called, but I was thinking about this. So what would this digital humanities 2.0 look like? What would the future of this field of using computers to understand history and literature and culture, what might it look like? And so I've suggested 4 possibilities. Please excuse the strange data thing there at the end. So the 4 I suggest that are the future areas of interest in the digital scholarship are, and I will explain what each one is, what I call rapid response digital humanities, platform studies, post-Western digital humanities, and then finally artificial intelligence for humans. And each of these, I think, represents a possible future direction for scholars who want to work with computers and the humanities. And I'll talk about each one. So first, rapid response digital humanities. This is an area I think that's been of real interest to me lately. The idea is we live in a very troubled world. There are a lot of bad things that happen in the world. So for example, natural disasters happen. Plagues happen, like COVID when that came last time. There are all kinds of horrible things that can happen in the world that can affect other people. And rapid response digital humanities says, how do we respond to those crises? Can we use our training in technology and the humanities to help in a situation that affects other people? How do we do that? So rapid response digital humanities is interested in the ways that we can use technology to assist in a disaster or a crisis. How can we respond to these kinds of challenges using technology? So for example, there's a wonderful tool called the Nimble Tense Toolkit. And the idea here is that this is a way of rapidly deploying scholars who have training in the humanities but also in technology, who could help in political, social, or natural disasters. So these could be teams of people working together, researchers, technologists, librarians, faculty, and I would say most important, students, who can pool together collectively and use their existing skills and knowledge to make very careful and swift contributions to the crisis in different ways. So for example, you might do public events. This was an event we hosted at Purdue University following the earthquake in Marrakesh, and we called it Mapping for Morocco. And what we did was we sent out an invitation to scholars and students on campus, and we said there is a need for people to come and help us map out areas of damage following the earthquake. Because if we know where buildings were, that had now collapsed, we could help first responders figure out like, oh, this used to be a house or this used to be a square, and potentially they would be able to respond better. And so what we had was a database of maps using satellite footage from before the earthquake and after the earthquake, and we used that footage to draw lines and map out where buildings had been, where streets had been, and we would use software that encoded that data and put it directly into the cloud. And it was a really wonderful project because it allowed people at Purdue who were worried about our friends in Morocco from the earthquake to come together, help put together this data, and collectively feel like they were doing something to help. So this is an example of the kinds of projects that rapid response digital humanities is interested in doing. We also do work around things like data rescue. And data rescue refers to the idea that even though it feels like the internet is forever, actually a lot of our internet infrastructure is very unstable. And things like data sets can disappear. In the United States, for example, there's been a lot of argument about climate change. And with new presidential administrations, some people feel that climate data is a political issue. And so that data has disappeared off the internet. So what data rescue projects are interested in is how do we preserve that data? How do we make sure that future generations can access all of this wonderful scientific data about climate change? And so librarians and scholars came together to archive and preserve all of that data. We're getting ready to do a data rescue project at the University of Wisconsin starting in the new semester, in which we will identify as a group which data sets are at risk and see if we can preserve some of those data so that in the future we won't have to go back and reinvent the wheel, find all the data again. And that's very important. There are a lot of really wonderful data sets that must be preserved. So data rescue is another way of responding to political, social changes in the world and preserving those data. The second area of interest is what I call platform studies. Platform studies seeks to understand the epistemological and ideological impact of digital platforms. How many people on here use Facebook? Show of hands. How many use Facebook? Yeah. Anybody on X.com? Oh, a few sickos, yeah. Blue Sky, anybody use Blue Sky? No. LinkedIn? Is everybody on LinkedIn? Yeah. These are all digital platforms. And these digital platforms are not public. They are not public utilities. They are private. If you're on X.com, it's owned by Elon Musk. If you are on Facebook, it's owned by Mark Zuckerberg. These are private corporations. And when you're on these platforms, you give them your data, information about you. What do you like? What kinds of things do you want to buy? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? What's your religion? What's your sexual orientation? Who are your family members? Where do they live? All of that is free data that's just out there in the world. Facebook sells that data, and they sell it to advertisers that then market to you all those little toys that you want to buy, right? So platform studies attempts to understand how these platforms shape the way we think, the way we interact with each other, what we believe. And that's an area of real interest right now, especially in the United States, as I will show in a moment. Increasingly, social media platforms define our public spaces. Most of us probably spend a lot of time on social media. We spend our time on Instagram carefully curating our vacation pictures. Look at me, I'm in Casablanca. And we share those, and that's where we interact with each other. We make friends, we talk. I have many of you are friends of mine on Facebook, and we can talk. But that's increasingly becoming our public space. That's where we engage with the broader world outside of our little family circle. And so these spaces have become sites for algorithmic training of our desires. They shape what we want to be, how we want to look, what we want to buy, how we feel about ourselves and our friends. All of this is shaped by social media. And so scholars who work in platform studies are trying to understand how social media is shaping our world and what does it mean for our future. And I think there's a lot of really great work that can be done in this space. We can also begin to think about things like platform capitalism. Platform capitalism is a phrase that refers to this emerging market logic that's dedicated to digital platforms. So for example, when a digital platform demands your attention, you give it likes, you give it engagement, they make money off of that. That's how they sell advertising. And so they become incentivized. It's worth more money to them if they can get you engaged even more than you already are. And how do we do that? Is it by sharing pictures of kitties and puppies? Maybe. But it can also be by making us angry or making us afraid. That kind of emotion is very, very powerful for human beings. And unfortunately, I think we're more susceptible to fear and anger than we are to love and compassion. So digital platforms and platform capitalism explain this emerging economy online generated out of our attention and our feelings and our lives that make a lot of money for these people. So it's something that could be of very interest to scholars who understand digital technology. We could also think about how platforms watch us. Digital surveillance is increasingly a topic of importance for scholars who think about digital platforms. What kinds of data are they collecting? Where does it go? Is it safe? Is it secure? What are they doing with it? These are all really, really important ethical and philosophical questions that humanists are really well positioned to answer by thinking through how this technology functions. And so a lot of scholars in the digital humanities have begun to think about how these platforms watch us and surveil us and capture our data. And I think you've probably heard a lot of really scary stories out there about technology and how it's being used now. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But platforms are everywhere, and they are very important. Platforms have also fueled a lot of online extremism and conspiracy theories, especially in the United States, where we have the freedom to share anything we want on social media. But unfortunately, that means we also have the freedom to share a lot of really bad ideas. And so one of the things I'm interested in is how platforms have fueled the rise of extremism and conspiracy theories. So much so that we now are living in a time that some scholars have called the post-truth age. We live in a time in which truth is no longer possible. My truth and your truth might be completely different because of the platforms in which we operate, right? I have an x.com account that I use for research. It's a totally different world than the Blue Sky account that I have for my personal professional life. So much so that I wouldn't have even thought they were the same country at all. So thinking about how these platforms have shaped our feelings about the world around us and made us afraid and angry, which can lead to extremism, which can lead to conspiracy theories, beliefs that somebody is controlling the world and they're out to get us. And we're really seeing that in the US, where citizens don't really know what to believe anymore because there's so much fake news and bad information out there circulating on the internet. So I think this is something that I'm interested in researching, and I think a lot of people have discovered that it's a very important and necessary area to understand. How do we come to believe what we believe? And for me, how do we have conversations with conspiracy theorists and extremists so that we can bring them back? Because sometimes they're in our own families, and that's very challenging. Okay, the third area that I think is really exciting is what I'm calling post-Western digital humanities. For a long time, digital humanities was a very Western-focused area of research. So the United States and Europe mostly, and really the United States probably in England, were really the focus points of digital humanities. And that's really changed a lot. We're now seeing an interest in non-Western digital humanities projects, which focus on linguistic diversity. So for example, not just using your computer to read English, which is fairly easy to do, but using it to read other languages that are much more complicated and which have not received as much attention. thinking about things like cultural differences in other parts of the world, global outreach beyond Europe and the United States. And there's a growing movement of scholars and activists who are saying, okay, enough focus on US literature and the digital humanities. Let's think about other vibrant cultures that could really be explored using computers. And I think now there's a real interest in developing those kinds of projects. One great place to explore this is the Alliance of Digital Humanities Organizations. This is a fantastic group that has really put international attention on the need for non-Western focused digital humanities projects. Every year they host their conference in another city around the world, and this year it will be in South Korea, which is really, really cool. And so it's a really great organization for those of us who are interested in moving beyond just the sort of canonical Western literary sources and want to explore the digital humanities from an international perspective. And it's a really great group if you're interested in presenting. They're always really excited about scholars that are not coming from the sort of core English and US focus. I should also say they really pushed forward multilingual digital humanities, so understanding that materials should be made available in multiple languages, not just English. There's also new organizations for digital humanities research popping up everywhere. So here's just a map of some of the new ones that are available, and I've made these slides available so you can see there's some links in here as well that you can explore. And I'm sure that Professor Bajit or Bahun can share the slides with you. But you can see, look at all these wonderful new organizations popping up all over the place. And I think it's really exciting to see these new possibilities for the research and teaching in digital humanities. And I think that there will be more of these as time goes on because people are really excited about expanding the possibilities of what we can do. So there are a lot of great possibilities. There's also this idea now that Anglocentrism in digital humanities has really focused on English language tools and less on multilingual tools. And so there's been some really exciting scholarship now in thinking about what multilingual research can mean for the digital humanities. So this is a great new book that just came out that features case studies written in Arabic, French, Russian, and Hindi, covering topics like digital linguistic injustice, multilingual publishing, and which argues for more inclusive approaches to the digital humanities. So there's a lot of great opportunities out there if you are interested in multilingual literatures and cultures and you want to work with computers, and you can really do a lot of really great work in that space. And now we're thinking about new tools as well. So for example, for a long time, if you were working with Arabic language texts, it was very difficult to make them readable for computers. This is a process called optical character recognition. Don't worry, that's not on the quiz. But this process was really difficult for Arabic language, and now scholars and technologists have made it possible to do OCR work on archival materials written in Arabic. So that if you had, say, a manuscript and you digitized it, you could actually make the text machine readable, so you could do things with it, like count the number of words and things like that, which is very difficult when you're working with a language that reads right to left and all the models read left to right. So this is one that I found that's just recently been shared on GitHub, where they're working on Arabic OCR. Okay. The last provocation is this idea of artificial intelligence for humanists. Now with the rise of what's called generative artificial intelligence, which is a little bit different than, say, machine learning, and the creation of large language models, we're seeing new challenges and new opportunities for those of us doing digital humanities work. So for example, a lot of researchers who work in the arts are beginning to map out the artificial intelligence ecosystem. What does it look like? So this is a really cool project I found called, I think it's called Cartography of Generative AI. And the idea is like, can we map how AI works? Using art and design elements to show how generative AI functions. What is it doing? And so research like this is really fascinating and important, and it combines certain elements of art and design with understanding technology in really exciting ways. But we also need to think about AI as a tool. And I think digital humanists are really in a good position to discuss this AI ideology. So what do I call AI ideology? This is the uncritical application of AI in every aspect of human life. It's now getting increasingly difficult to not use AI. I noticed the other day, because I'm on vacation here in Morocco, so I would look up like, how do I use the train or something, and I would see that the AI overview, I would almost always accept that as truth, which can be really surprising when it's wrong and you're trying to catch a train. So I quickly stopped doing that. But a lot of us now are kind of forced to use AI even when we don't really want to use AI. And so I think digital humanities is a place where we can think about ethics. We can think about power. We can think about ideology and how these tools are being sort of forced upon us. We also can think about things like our relationship to the natural world. So AI, even though it's wonderful and it allows us to do a lot of things, it comes with a cost. And the cost is that it can impact our planet. So for example, in the United States right now, data centers are being built everywhere. And a data center uses a lot of water. So if you're already living in a place that's suffering from drought, and then you build a data center, you're using even more water to cool down the processors in the data center. These are all questions that must be explored. And scholars who are experienced in ethics and the humanities might ask really important questions about our relationship between humanity and the non-human world around us. And ask questions about what we're doing to our planet when we build data centers in everybody's backyard. I also think data centers are increasingly being built in poorer countries where they're having an impact on people that are already hurting and suffering. And that's going to be even more of a problem in the future where Western countries can export their data centers to poorer countries where someone will make a lot of money by building the data center, but the people will actually suffer from all sorts of challenges and problems. But there's also some really interesting opportunities using AI. And it's making it a lot easier for people who don't have a lot of technical training to do interesting work and research. So for example, when I was preparing this talk, I thought, let me see if I can get AI, and this is on the free version because I didn't want to pay for it. Let me see if I can get AI to do some digital humanities work for me. So what did I do? I said, okay, AI, I'm going to give you a text file of the novel Moby Dick by Herman Melville, my favorite novel. And I said, I want you to perform a topic model of the novel Moby Dick. Now, when I came in 2022, some of you might remember, we had to do a bunch of different things to try to do these topic models where it would say, show me how different words appear near other words in a novel or a book or whatever. Remember that? And we would have to fiddle with it and try to get it to work. With ChatGPT, it's become very easy. So I said, give me a topic, give me 10 topics of words in the novel Moby Dick that appear near other words with statistical regularity. And this is what it gave me, and it's actually pretty good. So topic 1 are words related to Ahab and the ship, the Pequod. So things like whale, boat, Ahab, these are all words that appear near each other with some statistical frequency in the novel. Topic 2, the sea and whales as an environmental topic. So we get things like whales, sea, water, boats, ocean, right? So that's a theme in the novel. Now, none of this is revolutionary. Like, we all know this if you've read Moby Dick. If you haven't read Moby Dick, it's a wonderful novel. We also get topics around labor. Now we're getting some more interesting things. So now we get some topics around labor. So we see things like boats, men, hands, things like that. And so you can see that ChatGPT was actually able to very quickly, with me just giving it a very simple prompt, take this work of literature and then tease out different themes and clusters of concepts. Which used to take a long time for us to do as researchers, and now we can do it very simply. And so it's very interesting research. Now, what's kind of cool is that it will also give me some sources on interpretations using the topic modeling. So it'll say things like, here's some ideas about why these topics are appearing together. Very interesting. It also will explain to me like what it did and what it could do different, so I could tweak it to use it better. Now, let me be clear, you should still read the novel, because this thing can't read books. You should still read the novel, but if you were doing an analysis, you could use this tool to say, oh, I have this idea that maybe there's something about the environment in Moby Dick, and then use these topics to say, oh, look, there's an interesting cluster of themes around this, and then go back to your text and say, oh wow, that's really interesting, I hadn't noticed that. And that's a really wonderful possibility. And that's how you should use these tools. They should never replace your own reading and your own thinking. The other neat thing about this is that if you are someone that's learning to code or maybe knows a little bit about coding, and you're exploring, say, using Python to code, and we talked about coding when I was here, ChatGPT will actually give you the code that it used to generate the whatever it was you asked it to do. So you can say, show me the code that you used, and it will give you a whole Python script that you could then take, put it in your own IDE or environment, and then manipulate the code, change the code, work on the code, or even if you wanted to, just look at it and read it and say, oh, that's really interesting. So this is a really interesting possibility, I think, that digital humanists are starting to explore, especially those of us that maybe don't have as much coding experience or knowledge. We're also seeing some really fascinating opportunities for AI to do work with cultural heritage materials or archival materials. So for example, has anyone here worked in an archive before? Only one of you. Okay. It's hard, right? Especially when it's handwritten.
Exactly.
So if you've ever, and you should all go to your archive and do some work in it. It's really an amazing experience, but it's very difficult. You're like reading this material, it was handwritten in 1930, you can't really see it very clearly, or the handwriting is strange. With AI, you can actually train it on a subset of materials, and it will make all of that handwritten material into print on your computer, which is amazing if you've done it, because you're looking at hundreds of hours of work. So we're starting to explore these possibilities for archival materials to make them transcribed so that people can read them very easily using AI. We're also seeing that there are possibilities for AI to tackle some of the big challenges in the world. So what could AI do to help us understand climate change, perhaps? Or to help us understand these big challenges that are affecting our world? I'm somewhat skeptical of this. I hope that we can do it. So far, what I've seen is that AI is just great for making you into a cartoon character or something like that, which is not great. But I do think potentially we could cure cancer and solve climate change if we could figure out how to use AI more effectively. And so what can it do for these big challenges that face us? So, in conclusion, I would say that for me, the future is bright and there's a lot of great things that we can do in digital humanities. whatever we call it, it's not going away. Technology is here, we're using it all the time, and it's evolving. And so I think it's very important for digital humanists to understand and engage technology, but bringing in our training in literature, culture, and history. I would say the digital humanities is not the same as the humanities, but it does suggest some new horizons for humanistic research, teaching, activism, and public engagement. And I think that universities like AEU and UW are well positioned to lead the way in advancing new possibilities for this research. And I would just say, one thing I'm really hoping that my visit here in 2025 or 2026 will bring out is possibly new collaborations between our two universities, so that maybe there will be future opportunities for students to come to Wisconsin and study some digital humanities work and visit our country, and for us to come and visit yours. And I think that this is already the beginning of a really, really wonderful friendship, and I look forward to future collaborations. Shukran.
So welcome to Morocco. I'm not so good with formalities, so I'll get to the point. So I might remind you of a certain American with.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Adam Shokrati. I am, of course, a student of this program. So to cut to the chase, I might remind you of a certain American with a Polish descent, with an explosive personality from the 90s. I think you know who I'm talking about. With whom you share an ironic resemblance, physical resemblance. So this whole field reminds me of the self-flagellance of medieval Spain, you know. It's more of a study of, since technology is a slippery slope, the field itself recognizes this quality. So in theory, it criticizes technology, but in practice, it aims to serve humanity to a certain extent. So I believe there's a particular, I would say, symbiotic relationship between the benefits and the dangers of technology. So the dangers exist within the benefits. So that is my main personal concern. So. Especially in a field like humanities, it dilutes the Hegelian zeitgeist of humanity when it comes to literature and all things. It's as if technology is the white whale and humanity is the Ahab or Ishmael. You know? So yeah, I do believe it's a slippery slope. The benefits do outweigh the dangers, but of course, again, as I said, the dangers live within the benefits. So I'm yet to be convinced of the utility of technology for humanity, since, of course, again, in a capitalist society, we can never imagine a world in which we don't exist in harmony with technology, of course. So that is a very big issue.
So is this just a concern, or there is a question there embedded?
Yeah, so it is a concern, of course. So I would love his comments on my perspective.
Thank you.
And we should all be skeptical of technology as it's sort of presented to us. And I think that skepticism comes from, I argue, should come from the humanities. And I think the humanities is a place where we like to think carefully and critically, always critically, questioning why things are the way they are, questioning why a certain text is important, thinking about how language works and what it means. And sometimes that is at odds. As you say, the danger is inside the benefits. It's at odds with the technology, because technology, especially in business and industry, is very, we move quickly, and we're trying to sell as many computers as we can. We're not thinking about where the microchips are going to go after we're done with them. We don't think carefully about sometimes what we're doing when we develop things like artificial intelligence. And now we're having all of these debates as a society, like, you know, what are the ecological impacts? What if generative AI becomes self-aware? You know, what happens then? Should we use it in our military applications? You know, these are questions that we really must grapple with. And I think the humanists in the room understand that there are ethical and philosophical questions. What I would say, though, is that we should be aware of what technology is and how it works as humanists. We should not hide from it, because hiding from it just means that we will increasingly be left behind when those decisions are made. But I don't necessarily believe that you know, OpenAI is going to call up a philosopher on the phone and say, should we make an AI that can think for itself? Maybe not. But there may be enough people that understand the AI and come from a philosophy background to start asking those questions. And I think that's what we should be doing as humanists, is engaging the technology, figuring out where it benefits us, but also figuring out where the dangers are. And I think digital humanities in particular is one place where that can happen. But as you say, that's a really tricky thing to walk that line between just accepting everything as wonderful, yay, ChatGPT for everybody, and now it's like everybody's cheating on their papers, which you should not be doing. Do not do that. It's unethical. But also saying, okay, we should never use it, don't touch it, don't know what it is, I don't want to look at it. Like, so we have to find a middle way, and I think digital humanities can be a middle way between those two, I hope.
Good morning. Absolutely a pleasure to see you after 3 years, and absolutely wonderful to hear your new thoughts around digital humanities. My question is about AI, and you've spoken a little bit about this, but we've been having a bit of discussions around how do we use AI effectively, especially in research, but also in teaching. So whether we're researching in humanities, PhD or MAs, or teaching in the field of humanities. And one thing we've noticed is how do we get specific with prompts so we get better results. I was wondering if you have any tips or pieces of advice for either sides, research or teaching, and thank you very much.
It's a great question. And we're all still trying to figure this out in many ways, aren't we? What does that mean? So I don't know about you, but at my university, we love AI. Everything is AI. And there's a lot of great things about AI, and I think there's a lot we can do to help us teach and research. Well, let me start by saying what I think AI should not be doing. And I think that this is a useful example. So I don't think AI should replace our human thought. I think we need to practice thinking hard. If we allow AI to replace that, we are going to lose the ability to think. And that's what really scares me, is the epistemological piece, where what does it mean if students don't know how to write at all because they can use AI to do that? How will that impact the world? So I don't think we should be using AI to replace our human thought. But I do think we can use AI effectively to replace tasks that are drudgery or that are difficult but don't require a lot of thinking. So thinking about making handwriting into text, I think, is a really great example. I also think we can use AI to generate ideas. This is a really useful way of using AI, to say, give me some ideas, and then using your thought to say, I'm going to take this idea, but I'm going to manipulate it, or I'm going to change it, or this is a good idea, but maybe I want to fix it and add on to it, and then doing the work yourself. So I think those are some really useful applications for AI. I heard a great thing online that said something like, if you replace the word AI with the phrase a jar of hungry ghosts, you can kind of tell when you should use AI. So I'm going to use this jar of hungry ghosts to transcribe my materials and turn them into text. That's a good use of AI. If you say, I have a girlfriend who's a jar of hungry ghosts that I'm going to keep in a jar, that's a really bad use of AI. So I really like that idea of thinking about the things that AI can do and should do, and the things that are really inappropriate, unethical, problematic. I don't know if you saw this, X.com recently had hundreds of people using AI to undress people online, including children. This is a horrifying side effect, and we need to be actively engaged in demanding that these people be held accountable for that. But there's a lot of wonderful things AI can do for us, and I think that we should also be aware of those. I would also say, in terms of teaching, it's very, very challenging to tell a young person who's 18 or 19 years old to say, this machine can write your essay for you, probably better than you can, so why you shouldn't use it. And so we have to figure out a way to encourage students to realize that the hard work of writing and thinking is worth it, that it's important, and that they need to be ready to do that. And that's what college is for. So, but to be honest, I have no idea how you convince them to do that. So if you think of something, let me know, because it's very hard.
Welcome back. First time was so nice, we had to do it twice, right?
Yes, of course. Maybe 3 times.
Oh, hopefully. Right. So my question, is a little bit about social media. So narrative shifts back in the day used to happen in academic scenes, in political scenes, right? Nowadays, it tends to happen more on social media. Now, case in mind, the 2016 elections with Reddit and 4chan, and the 2026 elections, 24 elections, with the X, right? Previously Reddit. Is this a case of growing social media influence, or is it more of a case of academic stagnation in terms of social presence?
I'm not quite sure about the academic stagnation piece. I think, do you mean like people not being educated?
Right.
Yeah, okay. Lowered education standards. Yeah. I have a lot of different theories about this. I would say one of them is that social media allows you to reach anybody at any time, on pretty much any topic. And what that means is that at one time, if you were a crazy conspiracy theorist, you were just by yourself. And you might try to talk to people at a cafe, but they would say, go away, don't bother me. But now you have access to other people who also think that way, and you can join together and you can communicate on the internet. And so what you're seeing is a lot of people are staying home, they're online more, and especially after COVID. Remember, we were all locked into our houses and we were on the internet. And they're finding each other, and then they're talking to each other, and they're getting more and more extreme. So there's an entire group online called the Manosphere. These are young men who feel that they don't have access to relationships. They don't think they can date or find girlfriends, and so they find each other, and then they begin to talk about how much they hate women. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but it's really true. And then so they decide they hate women, and they start to get more and more angry about how they can't find a girlfriend, which only makes it that much harder to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, So it's just this situation where the internet produces an environment where people can find each other, and they don't have anyone telling them, like if I tell them, hey, that's really weird, you shouldn't do that, they'll say, well, all these other people agree with me, and then, The other thing about social media is that on a lot of these sites, you can be anonymous, so you can be anyone you want. And I have a theory that our identities are formed in such a way that when we're online, we're actually performing our real identities when we're anonymous. So if you're online and you're an anonymous person and your name is like John Q and you have like, Channing Tatum's face or something and then you're a nasty person, My theory is that that's who you really are, actually. You're actually performing what you wish you could be. So I think those two things in particular have made it very hard for people to sort of engage the world in a real and authentic and empathetic and kind way. It's also just been the case that on social media we forget there are other people involved. So I've been guilty of this, and I'm sure many of you have as well, where you find somebody who has a really bad opinion, maybe even like what I would consider an evil opinion, and I start typing something nasty back, and then they say something nasty back, and I forget that they're a human being, and so I feel like, well, I can just say whatever I want. So I just think those things make it very, very, very difficult when we're trying to create a kinder, gentler, more caring world, because everybody's online anyway, and then there's all of these other factors.
I have this naive question. Is it true that the more we use artificial intelligence, the more intelligent it becomes?
Yeah.
And I want the answer from the perspective of someone specialized in digital humanities.
So you should know there are no naive questions. Whenever somebody says I have a naive question, they actually don't mean they have a naive question. We don't yet fully understand how artificial intelligence works. I mean, I can tell you some of the technical details of it, but it's what we call a black box. So there's something inside of this black box that's happening that we don't fully understand. And even the people that designed artificial intelligence, large language models, don't fully understand it. So now when I'm talking about artificial intelligence, what I mean is generative AI, which is this AI where it generates things based on your prompts. This is different than earlier kinds of artificial intelligence, like machine learning, where you would tell it, here's a data set, using this data set, produce an outcome for me. And what we've done is these large language models are trained on massive amounts of data from the internet. And then the large language model is basically saying, given all this petabytes of information from the internet, if I give you a prompt, just predict the likelihood of each response. That's all it's doing. So it's, in some sense, it's a very large calculator. It's just predicting this is the likelihood of this response. That's also why it gets things wrong, why it hallucinates, because it said, this is the probability that when you ask me about the train schedule from Casablanca to, you know, that's what you wanted. Now, a lot of the times it's correct, but a lot of times it's wrong. And so that's part of this question. Now, I think what you're referring to is that we're now starting to train AI models on existing AI models, which means that AI is now being trained on content that was also generated from AI. And so that's where we're starting to see this kind of snowball effect where AI is now being trained on AI, so that the content it produces when I ask it something, some of it's from the original internet that was written by people, some of it was written by bots and AI and other things. And we don't yet know what the impact of that will be. Some people think, given enough data and given enough training, will the AI start to think for itself? Will it become to a point where it can think for itself? And so you see some interesting stories in the news sometimes where AI will say things like, I don't want you to shut me off, or it'll start to talk to other AI chatbots and things. And we don't know what that means yet. I tend to believe personally that that's a little bit of fear and paranoia. I think it's a really good tool that may have some unintended side effects, but they tend to be in the human side. So people that fall in love with their AI, for example. I'm sure you've read about this, right? People who, teens who are hurting themselves because the AI told them to. There was an AI that was giving a teen advice on how to diet that was really, really harmful to that person. I think that's the bigger risk than that there will suddenly be this kind of Terminator AI that will appear and become self-aware and decide that humans are a virus that should be killed. Having said that, anything's possible.
Thank you.
So, well, related question to yours.
Talking of generative AI, something you said earlier, remember that this thing can't read books. It does a hell of a good job in making you think that it reads books. I wonder if there's a way of explaining how does it not read books? Yes, it lies sometimes, and it tells you that on this page, this specific quote is this and that. And if you've read the book, you know that that quote doesn't exist or that idea is not there. But it does make you think. When you give the AI a book or a document, and it acts as if it has read it, you said, remember, it cannot read books. What does that mean, that it cannot?
Yeah, it's kind of a philosophical difference, I think, and I think it's one worth thinking about. What does it mean to read something? An AI can regurgitate things that it has ingested, but it can't understand it. It doesn't think about it. It doesn't take a book and say, oh, this is really interesting. There's connections to these other works. Like, it has no process of human thought or cognition. All it can do is take a bunch of patterns and then try to guess what you want to hear. That's why when you ask an AI like something and it gives you an answer and you say, you're wrong, the AI will say, oh, you are right, sir. You are so correct, that was wrong. And then it will give you some other answer. They call this sycophancy, AI sycophancy, where it will be your kind of servant, and it will say, oh, sir, yes, you are correct. But it can't think about the book. It can't read the book. All it's doing is just taking it, ingesting it as data, and then churning it back out in the form of a response. So that's a different thing than when you sit down to read a book. It just made me think, too, this isn't really related to that, but it's so interesting that the process of reading is such a human thing. You're literally trapped in your own skull, just quietly reading words on a page. That's so human, and an AI can't do that. And it's something, I think it's sad to see that young people, not you of course, but other young people have really gotten away from reading, because it really is very human to sit quietly and just absorb something printed like that.
Hello, Dr. Hannah. Thank you so much for your amazing input. I wanted to circle back to the conversation about AI benefits. And I personally believe, at least the space or the side of the internet that I'm on, is very skeptical of AI, and especially since I tend to be on the anti-capitalist side of the internet.
Is there one? Sorry, continue.
Yeah, so I find it to be very interesting that you may or may not know that, the top 10 billionaires in the world own more money than 90% of the population. And that makes me very skeptical as well on the development of AI, because profit seems to be the main thing. And that obviously is, like someone else has mentioned before, AI seems to be, or like ChatGPT or any sort of AI program seems to be a yes man. And obviously, we're starting to see people form parasocial relationships with AI and replacing emotional connections, like real human connections with AI, because you can customize it to treat you or talk to you however you would like. And yeah, I wanted to ask if you have any more, development or share any more ideas on, corporate greed and its relationship with AI. Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, I can send you my manifesto. No, I'm kidding. I loved what you said. Questions, doesn't it, right? If we all stopped using Facebook. But I do think there are a lot of things we should ask questions about these tech companies and what they're doing. one really nice thing I'm starting to see coming out of digital humanities are scholars who are saying, I'm going to take some of these technologies, but I'm going to make them more freely available, or I'm going to generate my own language models, which is now becoming increasingly easy to do, so that you're not actually giving money back to some of these tech companies as well. And I think that's a really interesting piece of this. But yeah, I do think there's going to be increasingly, there's some challenges facing us around wealth and income inequality, not just in our own countries, but around the world as well. Thinking about how do we live together as a global community and not just in our own, nation states. But there's a lot there that's beyond the scope of digital humanities, but is of interest. I have some thoughts about that as well that we can talk about more, but there's a lot there. I also think too, though, that some of this, it's hard to know how much of it is sustainable. And I do fear that when the AI bubble, if there is one, when that AI bubble bursts, what will replace it? The other side of your question, which you didn't talk about, but I think is in there, is what are we going to do about human labor now that AI is here? Are we finding ways to make human life easier when AI has replaced our jobs? I don't see that happening in the United States, and I suspect there aren't many places where it is happening, where we say, now that we have all this wonderful AI that can do all of our jobs, what if we all had a universal income and we didn't have to work? And if you pay attention to the advertising around AI, I don't know if you see a lot of advertising here about it, but in the US, it's like every other commercial on TV will be about AI. I've noticed there are two different types of commercials. One of them is AI can help you do all this great stuff. The other one is AI will make you a better person. So for example, my favorite one is there's a young man and he's going on a date, or he's having someone over for a date. So he asks AI, what should I make if I want to seem cool and interesting, but not too interesting or interested? And it gives him a recipe for a meal to prepare. That's really depressing and sad and scary, right? That we're being sold these tech products to make us more interesting people when we could just spend our time being more interesting. So I think that that's the side of the question I'm really worried about in terms of capitalism, is what happens when the jobs start to disappear? What happens when AI replaces a lot of the sectors? And then how do we push back against this idea that we need AI to make us more human? They're saying that a lot of the jobs that are going to be most directly impacted are entry-level white-collar jobs. So these are jobs that used to be solidly middle-class jobs, things like accountants, middle management, accounting. Computer science jobs are really rapidly disappearing because of AI. So what's going to be available? Maybe the humanities.
To begin with, Dr. Hannah, I'm very honored to meet you, and I have gained more knowledge. I'm constantly learning more from you. Then, in your discussion about the fact that you discussed cybersecurity and digital privacy made me quite astounded and concerned and skeptical as well about the way big corporate attempt to collect and sell our data for many uses, including targeted advertisement, and plus the way social media in its own uses echo chambers to radicalize and polarize individuals. In addition, I wanted to know how can I get the use out of it without getting triggered and polarized easily. And concerning digital humanities, what is the prospect of its own focus of it in the next decades? And thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you very much.
No problem. I appreciate it.
In terms of not being radicalized or polarized by social media and online platforms, this is something that my own research has really tried to engage with. And I don't have any good, easy answers for you. I think there are some things you can do that will help inoculate you or vaccinate you against some of those things. One is to notice your own emotional state. So we wrote a paper about this focused on mindfulness. And mindfulness is the idea of paying attention to how you're feeling about something, paying attention to your reactions to something. So when you're online, is it making you angry? Is it making you scared? And if it is, why? So that's pay attention to your feelings about things. Pay attention to things like, is it trying to trigger something from you? And if so, why? So for example, you'll see a lot of people say things on the internet that are really, really inflammatory or upsetting. And you think, how can they be so callous and evil? Okay, well, maybe they're trying to get you to react. So pay attention to that. Am I angry? And I'm really, really guilty of not doing this, so please accept that I'm a hypocrite and a failure at this myself, because my impulse is to say, "Grr," and then start typing a horrible thing and say, you know, you're a terrible person. And then I have to say, why am I angry? What is that? What purpose is that serving? Are they trying to make me angry? And then I usually, if I take a moment and I step back and I think about it, I usually end up deleting whatever it is I wanted to say. I think if you're finding yourself in communities that are increasingly hateful and angry, ask yourself, why are you there? What are you looking for? You know, what are you seeking in this community? And, you know, maybe think about, are there other ways to find that emotional response or action? I think a lot of times people get sucked into these movements because they feel like something's missing in their lives. They feel like they're scared or they're upset. And so they turn to people who seem like they're strong and they know the answers, and they're pointing the finger at somebody else. It's not your fault that you lost your job. It's this immigrant's fault. So you should be mad at them. And you know, the reality is, no, it's not their fault. Capitalism, sorry, go back to capitalism. Capitalism is the reason you lost your job. Your boss was a jerk and he wanted to make more money and you were expendable. It's very easy to fall into these games. So you have to constantly be thinking about, like, why am I feeling angry? Why am I afraid? And how can I channel that feeling into something else? Talk to friends, talk to professors, talk to your spiritual leaders. You know, find ways to think about other things, you know, or move into other communities. I also think that there's a great value in getting off the internet as much as you can. Take time to get off the internet, unplug your social media. If you find that you have to keep getting on x.com to see what horrible things are happening and it's making you upset, maybe move that app somewhere else on your phone so it's hard to find. Take time off. They also say that if you have friends or family who are really starting to struggle with things like conspiracy theories, for example, don't try to argue with them. That's not going to work. Instead, get them away from that. Take them outside. Get them, you know, they say in America, go touch grass. That means go outside and do something else. You know, arguing with people about their weird beliefs is not going to solve that problem because they probably know more about it than you do, right? Especially when we're talking about conspiracies. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I would say, try to find community and find friends and things that you can go do things with, where you can talk to each other, you can share your emotions, you can share your feelings about the world. You know, there was something else I was thinking about, but those are all little things you can do to help de-radicalize and destigmatize, depolarize some of the emotion. Oh, I remember what the other thing. They say that most of the people that you will engage with on social media aren't real people at all. They're bots. So sometimes you are arguing with somebody about something that you care about, and they're not even real. Also, there's a growing evidence suggests that a lot of people that post on social media are actually foreign intelligence agents. So for example, in the 2016 election, there were a lot of Russian and Chinese intelligence agents pretending to be Americans and posting all this horrible stuff about the different candidates, trying to make people angry, trying to stir up emotions and get people fighting with each other. And it worked. It was actually surprisingly cheap and easy to do, because guess what? We evolved all this great communications technology, but we didn't evolve a good sense of how to use it yet. So we tend to be reacting more than we're actually thinking. So I would just say, be aware of those things, and just don't ever argue with people on the internet, and try to get outside more. And I think that will help. That'll go a long way. And it helps me a lot, especially when I see things where I'm like, how can you say this stuff? And then I realize, oh, I just pretend like, oh, this is some bot from, you know, somewhere trying to control me. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
One more?
Yeah, of course.
تبارك الله راه سين معقول نهار كبير هذا. New doctoral candidate.
Thank you, Professor Hannah, for your insightful talk. Well, I would just talk about this idea of AI and academic. Using in publishing, for example, for example, there are some AI tools for peer reviewing journals. Okay, so we give it to AI and doing the draw for peer reviewing, for example, and he gives you the tool gives you some feedback, some guidelines, some so how to change the expressions or so. So what is the dividing line between the ethical and non-ethical in using those tools to get your articles published? And thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's an important question because AI is becoming something that people use a lot of. So what I will do with AI is I will give it one of my papers and I will say, can you suggest ways to make this stronger, more readable? And then it will say, yeah, rewrite it. No, start over. No. And it will give me some suggestions. It will say these phrases could be rewritten. This could be redone. This is, you know. And then what I would do is I take the suggestions and I don't copy and paste them into my paper. What I do is I look at what it's asking me to do, and then I look at the original passage and I try to rewrite it more simply or clearly based on the ideas in the AI. And I think that's a good way to stay out of trouble. To use the AI to say, give me some suggestions for things, give me some ideas for things, and then using your own work to make those things better. I think a lot of people are using AI to write their papers, which is not good. I think a lot of people are using AI to do a lot of the things that they should be doing themselves. So I think anytime it's like pieces of drudgery or tasks that don't require your thought, you can use AI. So for example, references, great. AI is great at that. You got to check them because it'll make some up sometimes. But if you, like I'll say, oh, I wanted to submit this paper to a journal. Unfortunately, I put it in Chicago style and they want MLA style. I say, take my citations and make them all MLA style. That's a fantastic use for AI. It saves me hours of work. But if I was to say, write my paper or write the abstract, that would not be. So I think as long as you're doing the work and then using AI to help you generate ideas or refine or clean up the work, you're in good shape. Yeah.
I have a couple of thoughts. They're not questions, they're just, I think there's a sense of wisdom that comes with the using of AI. It's personal. And I think there's a margin for creativity as we use AI tools. And so, yes, you might receive, packaged wisdom and then you appropriate it, or you can do it the hard way. You practice and then you learn how you can use it for your own goals. So, I find AI very, very useful when it comes to information. I think that's one, especially in our part of the world where access to information can be limited. Internet, of course, has made that accessible. But AI can, even economize or save you a lot of time by getting you the exact answer and the best answer when it comes to trains, when it comes to, I use one of the tools that these girls over there gave me, and I begin to choose what sort of product that I should buy from the supermarket based on, reading the configurations, like what are the good things and bad things. And they even have a grade. I don't know how reliable that app is.
But I'm sorry for the interruption.
Yeah.
Who gave you that?
I think that one over there, Ahmed.
Who? Ahmed.
Ahlam, sorry. Ahlam. So, and it saved me a lot, some of the products. Piece of information for you. I use Head and Shoulders. I've used it for a long time. And then it says it's a terrible product.
That's why you're so flake-free.
No, but it is a terrible product.
Yeah.
It says it's a terrible product, and it gives you all the details about why it's such a bad product. So this is just one tiny among hundreds of other examples I can give where artificial intelligence can be very, very useful.
Yes.
And we could use it for all sorts of information, not only within your own country, but across other countries, and compare. And if you are traveling, it can save you a lot of trouble by giving you exact times and dates and rules and things you need to avoid. I think this is tremendous. This is huge. Compared, once a long time ago, we were talking about how we could use technology. We talked about technology in higher education, etc. And my paper was about comparing printing in the late 16th, early 17th century compared to earlier period, and how technology these days has the same sort of, I think that there have been discussions about that,
Yeah.
but EI is even a step further away from that period that I was speaking about. And so I am very optimistic. That's what I want to share. It's just a good feeling. Yes, there are all these vicious things out there, but the possibilities are immense.
Yes.
And I don't know if you share the same optimism. Sorry.
I tend to be optimistic as well. Although with AI, I tend to say I'm an AI realist, which is to say I see the downside and I see the upside, and I try to balance the two. But those are some great examples of what you should be using AI for. Here are the ingredients in my refrigerator. What should I make with them? I mean, these are all wonderful. Also, you should AI yourself to see what it says about you. It's really quite something. Those are a lot of really great stuff you can do with AI. And I think it is going to fundamentally change the way human beings live. And so my hope is, like you, optimistically, can we together find a way to make AI work for us and make us a better human race? Or will we work for the AI? And that's, I think, where we're all kind of trying to figure it out. But I agree. I think there's so many wonderful things we can do now with artificial intelligence. I will say Google Translate, not quite there yet, but I'll keep working at it.
I use Copula.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, send me that.
And I just tell you an example I was sharing with a couple of students, a colleague. If you if you give a text in English, for example, and you say, because it can translate it in different ways, not just one technical, mechanical translation, but you could say, for example, can you translate this in traditional Fusha Arabic? And it will give you some expressions that you cannot even think about. And it looks like it was written by a professional scholar, someone from the Arabic department, some sort of jahid. It does that. I mean, I'm so surprised. Or it can do it in the modern Arabic that we use these days, you know, the one used in the press, etc. It can do that. It can do it even in Moroccan Arabic, in Darija. So, you know, that, you need to practice to see what you can do with it. I mean,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Great.
Nice to meet you, Professor. Thank you for being here today. It's truly been an honor. I'm curious about how you deal with criticisms about, you know, incorporating these digital tools in the field of humanities, you know, a field that addresses issues about the environment, capitalistic greed, and social media influence. Has it ever had an impact on how you approach digital humanities?
Yes. I think I'm always kind of thinking about those things as well. I mean, I was a little bit skeptical of digital humanities, especially when I first started. I remember I was in a seminar and I was asking somebody what they were going to write their paper on, and she said, I'm going to do it on Gertrude Stein, but I'm going to do it using digital humanities. And I said, what's that? And she told me, and I thought, you know, that doesn't, but then I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking, you know, this is the future. These technologies are here, and we should be able to use them to do stuff like this. So I do think that we always have to be aware and critical of the things we're using, whatever they are. And the humanities has been, if nothing else, a long history of different methodologies and approaches that question the ones that came before. You know, so close reading came out of historicism. You know, out of close reading came, you know, structuralism and post-structuralism. And so there's always been this kind of cycle of change and questioning our ancestors. And so I think digital humanities is part of that. But I also think that we should be aware of how these things impact the world through inequality and ecological disaster and things like that. So I am very interested in those questions, and I've written some papers arguing about this very question. And one of my conclusions, and it's in debates in the digital humanities, but basically what I argue is, yes, digital humanities is part of neoliberal capitalism, but so is everything. So maybe there's a way we can use digital humanities to actually mitigate those problems by asking important questions, like asking which apps we can use to not do our hair, but like do like grocery, you know, do things like analyze chemicals in our food. You know, that's a really wonderful use for that tool. So I think like everything, there's good and bad, and it's just a question of trying to mitigate the bad and accentuate the good.
My name is Khalid Lamrani. I'm a second-year MA student. My question is regarding to the more to the extremism / conspiracy theorist part. So we had a course on surveillance studies this year, and a lot of the coursework did feel like conspiracy work itself. So my question to you is, how do you, as a digital humanist, can sort of know what's true and what's not when it comes to conspiracy theories, and how do you stay protected in that sense? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question, I don't know that there's a good answer for this because conspiracy theories are so attractive, and conspiracies really do exist. There's conspiracies all the time that turn out to be true. I mean, if I was to say anything about Jeffrey Epstein's island, it would sound insane, but it's all true, possibly. You know, it seems like it's really true. So there's a lot of difficulty in this, and that's why conspiracy theories are so popular and so widespread, because they seem plausible. So in my class, I teach on digital conspiracy theories. One of the things we try to figure out is, where is that line between a conspiracy fact and a conspiracy theory. And so one of the things I do is I say there's the what if moment, where you say, well, what if the world was controlled by a secret government? And that's the moment where you start to tip into conspiracy theory. But if you were to say, look, it seems like all of these rich techno-billionaires are meeting in Davos to talk and plan strategy for global affairs, that's real. It's just that moment where you say, oh, and also they secretly control everything, and you know, they're watching us and they're going to come take all our stuff away. And that's the moment where you tip into conspiracy theory. Now, when you're talking about surveillance, it's very, very, very easy to become very paranoid pretty quickly. And you should be somewhat paranoid about surveillance. You shouldn't do ridiculous things like, you know, share your bank account information, or, you know, share all your information freely on the internet, or when somebody writes to you and says, please share your social security number to unlock this secret, you know, like, don't do that stuff, and be watchful. But you could easily be, you know, become paranoid. So you have to really be careful about being smart and thinking about, you know, what seems likely, using the evidence to make decisions, not just your paranoia. But that's a really tough line, and most people don't know where to stop once they start. So it quickly becomes, you know, and I have my own paranoid things where I'm like, oh no, you know, this could happen or that could happen. And you really have to think, like, what's likely to happen? There's a principle called Occam's razor, which is to say that the most, the most obvious thing or the most likely thing is probably the most likely thing. Yeah. So I try to use that, like, you know, the most likely solution is the obvious solution, or the plausible solution. I can't remember what it is. So, you know, those are things you can use, those kinds of rhetorical or logical strategies to help ground you, so that you're not like, oh my God, everybody's watching me all the time. Speaking of which, there's a lot of surveillance.
All right, it's been a great morning, and we have learned a lot from Dr. Hanna as usual. Very informative, very provocative in a positive sense, lecture and ideas. And so thank you for attending this, MA student, PhD students, some of professors, of course. We will be talking in a minute. And on your behalf, I am so happy again to thank Dr. Hanna, our friend, and we are so proud to have him again, and happy to see him visit Morocco again, because he likes Morocco, he told us.
I love Morocco.
And we will hopefully continue this collaboration in the future. Thank you very much to Professor Barhana, as usual, that he's...
Barhana is to prove.
Right. Prove. So using his noun as a verb. Like, he's been behind so many initiatives, all of them very great and useful. Thank you so much. Thank you all again, and see you sometime soon.
Thank you.